Stimulating talk. Breaking news. 630. WMAL.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Big Show. My name is Derek Hunter. I am contributing editor at thedailycaller.com and a writer at biggovernment.com, and I'm joined in the studio by Mary Katharine Ham, who's a senior writer at Big Daily Caller. I almost gave you a different job, Mary. Welcome.
Hello, good to be here.
And also Brian Darling. Ryan rounds out the trifecta. He is Director of Government Relations at the Heritage Foundation and writes for theredstate.com, biggovernment.com, pretty much anywhere that'll publish his stuff.
Yeah, and a weekly column for Human Events.
And a weekly column at Human Events. Now, you may wonder why we call it The Big Show. Now, Mary Katharine, you want to explain your choice for the name of the show?
Well, I was just going to say that we needed a superlative, so I put a bunch out there, including The Pretty Show and The Cute Show, and they were summarily rejected.
Vetoed quickly. Brian and I are a couple of chuds. For those of you who don't know what a chud is, the cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller, great awful movie from the 80s. But, The Cute Show would be great if it was just you, but you got a couple of chuds over here in the corner. It's not really going to work out with that. But, keep coming up with the names. We're not married to The Big Show.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'll have plenty of superlatives.
Yeah, we're just dating The Big Show. We're not married to it.
The Fuzzy Show.
Keep working on it. Buy a thesaurus this week.
Yeah.
And, all right, so we've got a great show lined up for you today. In the next hour, we're going to be joined by Adam Baldwin from TV's Chuck. I'm very excited about that. And My Bodyguard, Full Metal Jacket. I watched both of those yesterday in preparation for this. We're going to talk about education and Hollywood and all sorts of things. If you want to get to know Adam Baldwin, he writes for biggovernment.com on top of that. Then in the 6 o'clock hour, we're going to be joined by Senator Rand Paul, which is very exciting because he's looking like a very promising, great senator from Kentucky. He's going to give us a State of the Union preview, what he hopes to hear and what he expects to hear, and unfortunately the differences between the two.
Yeah, something makes me think that's going to be a large gap.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to make the Grand Canyon look like a little jump. And to start off the show, though, first, since this is the big show, we have to address the big news of the day. The bomb dropped last night on MSNBC. Now, I'm not talking about their ratings at this time, but all right, let's cue the music. Last night, unbeknownst to anyone, mostly because no one watches, Keith Olbermann signed off for the last time on his MSNBC show, the aptly named Countdown with Keith Olbermann, to pursue something. No one is quite sure why Olbermann will no longer be hosting Countdown, MSNBC's highest-rated show, which is kind of akin to being the world's tallest midget, since Fox News generally triples his rating. But speculation is running wild. Whatever the reason, and we'll discuss the possibilities in a minute, the liberal world has been rocked. The flags at Media Matters would be flying at half-staff today, if they allowed flags at Media Matters. They're probably the biggest losers out of this mess, as they seem to have a T1 line directly into the back of Olbermann's head, since about 90% of what came out of his mouth was from their website. Somewhere out there, George Soros and Eric Bullard are huddled together in a bunker, weeping, plotting their next move. Never fear, they'll be back. With all that Soros cash, how could they not? But Keith won't be. So the only certainty in this story is that Keith Olbermann is the most unemployed person in the world. That's right. Keith Olbermann is no more. Now, I don't know, this isn't going to be the where were you when Kennedy was shot moment of our generation, but it'd be pretty close for some conservatives to see that. I personally, I was watching a movie, I was watching My Bodyguard, and I saw Twitter, and Howard Kurtz had tweeted out that Keith Olbermann just resigned. And, of course, I immediately switched to MSNBC, and Friday night is the night that they show prison documentaries all night. So they don't even rerun it, so I missed it. Luckily, these websites capture the audio. But what about you, Mary Katharine? Where were you when you got the shocking news?
I believe you sent me the shocking news because I was nowhere near MSNBC at the time. But I'm interested to see what happens here. I mean, what's the story behind this? It'll all certainly come out. I'm wondering whether he quit abruptly as a flourish because he likes the theatrical and he knew he'd be the huge news of the day today, or if it was really that abrupt a parting of ways.
Well, the speculation is all over the place, from he was fired to he resigned to Comcast kicked him out because Comcast just is in the process. They haven't even finalized the process of buying NBC Universal. So TMZ says he was fired. Howard Kurtz says he'd wanted out for a long time. I don't know that they're mutually exclusive stories. Now,
you know what I always thought was funny is he used to just not show up. I mean, there used to be shows where he would magically not be on the air for a few days, and there were reports that he would have disputes with the ownership there, and he'd get mad that some other show had a host on that he didn't like or a guest on that he didn't like. So he seemed to have temper tantrums every once in a while. By the way, have you all ever been the worst person in the world? I never had the honor.
No, I think Mary Katharine was though once, weren't you?
As a 3-time veteran of the world's worst list. I was not always the worst. I think I was only once the worst.
But you did top the podium once.
Yes, I did once.
Awesome.
And I've 3 times made it into the running. I was really surprised by how this went down. And frankly, even as a veteran of the worst person's list, I will say I kind of think that people who get not okay compared to Fox, but ratings.
The tallest midget.
I'm just surprised he didn't get a little bit more time, if that's indeed how that news comes out.
Yeah, his ratings weren't great, but they were better than CNN's in the same time period. I mean, he was doing a pretty good job for them. He was the highest-rated show in their network. I mean, he was. I watched it every once in a while. I wanted to see what he was saying about conservatives. So I think a lot of conservatives are going just to see what's the left saying. You look at Olbermann and Maddow and all them just to see what they're ranting and raving about. But that probably gave him a little boost to their ratings.
Well, and I think he was a lot of drama for a lot of money. And then maybe his ratings didn't end up better enough in order to justify that. Yeah,
the cost per viewer ratio, I think, for Keith Olbermann was, let's face it, he was the one who sort of built that network. Chris Matthews was there, but he wasn't drawing in new viewers. It was sort of really in the tank below CNN. He came in, raised it up to the second. 1/3 of the ratings of Fox, but still, they wouldn't be where they were it not for Keith Olbermann. And he also brought in Rachel Maddow, who is their second best, highest rated host, I suppose. So he's responsible for, at least partially, for the network existing and this mildly successful level that it is. But we do have...
Which, by the way, speaks to just how obnoxious he had to be to let them go. Well, to get let go.
Yeah, well, he's got that reputation. I've talked to some people who've worked at MSNBC, and they say that he is not the most pleasant person to be around, shall we say.
Come on.
No, I swear. I'm not making this up at all, Brian.
You never know it by his on-air personality.
No, not at all. Let's listen to a little bit of his sudden, because there was no leaks about this before he announced it on the air. There was nothing. Clip 13 here is the first bit of his sort of surprise farewell.
I think the same fantasy has popped into the head of everybody in my business who has ever been told what I've been told, that this is going to be the last edition of your show. You go directly to the scene from the movie Network, complete with the pajamas and the raincoat, and you go off on an existential, otherworldly, verbal journey of unutterable profundity and vision. You damn the impediments and you insist upon the insurrections, and then you emit Peter Finch's guttural, resonant "so." And you implore, you will the viewer to go to the window, open it, stick out his head, and yell. Well, you know the rest.
Well, it does really sort of hint at that he was fired, because he says, when you're told this is going to be your last show. I don't know for sure, but what will you miss most, Brian, about Keith Olbermann?
Oh, his rage, his anger, just watching him get all spun up about Michelle Bachmann. He seemed to be always upset about her and Sarah Palin. He was always complaining about her, and I actually enjoyed watching, because you could see the 5 segments he was going to have, and you could preview to see if there's anything you wanted to watch or DVR. And I did watch it every once in a while. It was entertaining for me. I'd obviously flip around, but I'm not going to miss him. I wouldn't say I'm going to miss him, because he's probably going to show up somewhere else, but yeah. I did miss his the entertainment value every once in a while.
Now, Mary Katharine, you, in addition to being at the end of his foil, I suppose, trying to keep the new tone going, you've also had some fun with Keith Olbermann, and his mushed up. Talk about his little mushed up bag of meat comment about Michelle Malkin.
Oh yeah, he's famously, he's of course on the rhetoric police now, and decided to, right before the show's demise, change the worst person in the world to almost the worst person in the world or something. He toned it down a bit. But in the past, he has been known to use his own brand of harsh rhetoric, once referring to Michelle Malkin as a mashed up bag of meat with lipstick on it. So I decided to at one point spoof his new Leaning Forward ad and peg him for that. But I think it'll be interesting to see on the right if anybody feels the loss of this rival. You know, sometimes you get very caught up in fighting with somebody, but I think probably Olbermann was more caught up in fighting with Bill O'Reilly with no response whatsoever than any person I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, 90% of what goes on MSNBC is clips of Fox and people complaining about it.
Well, and the Washington Post, in writing about this today, said, he would skewer Fox hosts with sarcasm and sort of daring them to respond. No, they just didn't respond because it's Keith Olbermann.
It's like a gnat biting at your ankles.
Exactly.
I'll never forget, I was watching a segment where Keith Olbermann had on Howard Dean, and they were discussing the election prospects. It was in January or February of 2009, and they were talking about the Missouri Senate race, and they were talking about Kit Bond and how he was going to have a difficult time winning his reelection. And I remembered seeing that Kit Bond had already announced his retirement a few weeks earlier. So you had Howard Dean, who should know better, and Keith Olbermann having a whole segment talking about how tough it is, how tough it's going to be for Kit Bond to win his reelection when he'd already announced his retirement weeks earlier.
I think that's a sort of a plan on MSNBC, because I watch Chris Matthews pretty frequently, and it's clear he hasn't Googled any of his guests before they come on.
Or watched his own show sometimes, because he talks about vitriol and he's ready to explode. His face turns red. It just gets out of control.
I think Olbermann being off the air, at least even for a week, will probably lead to more civility.
You really think so? Or will the others sort of, nature abhors a vacuum, especially when it's between two ears, and there's a lot of that over there. Will somebody try and clamor to be the next Keith Olbermann?
Well, the question, I always had this great fantasy where Alan Grayson would end up getting a primetime show at MSNBC, but he seems like a lot of drama for a lot of money probably also, so I don't know if they'd trade him in.
Oh, man, that would be awful. But apparently the rumor is that Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks is going to be getting a show at 6 o'clock. They're going to move Lawrence O'Donnell from 10 o'clock to 8 o'clock, keep Maddow the same, move Ed Schultz to 10 o'clock so less people can see him, and people will be able to sleep. Oh, I get to go to bed an hour earlier now that he's on at 10, and put Cenk Uygur, who is one of the most vitriolic, angry human beings ever, in at 6 o'clock. Facts, at least they're sticking with their facts be damned theme over at MSNBC, so you got that going for you if you're a progressive out there really worried about what's going to happen to the quality of the shows on the air.
Well, and there's something sort of poetic about Lawrence O'Donnell taking over Olbermann's time slot, because I think what might have been a death knell for that show was when Lawrence O'Donnell subbed and got better ratings. That's never a good sign for the resident host.
That's why they always say if you're going to have a guest host, make sure it's somebody who's awful.
Exactly.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I was reading that he's still got a great contract. I mean, he still is under contract, so he's still going to get paid millions for not doing anything.
About $7 million. I think that if he'd put out the call, we could have, from conservatives, raised about $10 million a year just to keep him off the air. But, he's not into the market forces. He just wants to get out of there. Now, let's go to the second part of his goodbye. It's clip 14 here.
In the mundane world of television goodbyes, reality is laughably uncooperative. When I resigned from ESPN 13 and a half years ago, I was literally given 30 seconds to say goodbye at the very end of my last edition of SportsCenter. As God is my witness, in the commercial break just before the emotional moment, the producer got into my earpiece and he said, can you cut it down to 15 seconds so we can get in this tennis result from Stuttgart? So I'm grateful that I have a little more time to sign off here.
Yeah, a little more time. He had no notice, but he got a little more time at the end of the show because he can control the show, unlike ESPN, which I heard he was fired from, by the way. But anyway, if you're out there in Radio Land and you want to join in the conversation, if you're going to miss Keith Olbermann just terribly, we really want to hear from you. Or if you want to share your favorite Keith Olbermann outrage, the number here is 1-888-630-WMAL or pound 630 on your AT&T phone. And we'll continue this conversation and are lamenting the loss of Keith Olbermann when we return just after this.